I'm sorry. Okay, we'll do this again because we're just now unmuted. Welcome to the Siyum tonight of the 3 weeks of the Neshei Chabad Hilchos Beis Habchira Hakel. It's really been a very exciting 3 weeks, really learning these halachas of the Beis Hamikdash. This Siyum and tonight is Le'ili Nishmas, Maras Rivka Bas Reb Tzvi Ela Shalom, and also Chaya Freda Bas Eliyahu. And Yabadi Ben Chaim L'Chaim, it's L'Rafua Shlema for Chaya Mushka Bas Netel, Kol Chole Yisrael. We're going to begin with giving tzedakah. Gedai letzedakah shemekareves es ha'geula. And to donate, to give tzedakah to Neshei Chabad, please, NesheiChabadCentral.org. NesheiChabadCentral.org. We'll say the Rebbe's Kapitel. The Siyum tonight will be, we thank very much Rabbi Chaim Levi Goldstein for last night's shir and the Sicha, and tonight the Siyum will be done by Rabbi Hoffinger. Rebbe's Kapitel. Shir Malos LeDavid Samachti Ba'imrim Li Beis Adonai Nelech. Oim Dois Hayu Ragleinu B'Sharayach Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim Habnuya Ki'ir Shechuvra La Yachtav. Shesham Alu Shvatim Shifteya Edus LeYisrael Lohedus L'Shem Adonai. Kishama Yashvu Chisois LeMishpat Chisois LeVeis David. Shalu Shalom Yerushalayim Yishlayu Avayich. Yishalom B'Chelech Shalva B'Armanasayach. L'manachai V'Reyai Adabra Na Shalom Bach. L'man Beis Adonai Eloheinu Avaksha Toiv Lach. Yechi Adonenu Mareinu V'Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach La'olam Vad. Yechi Adonenu Mareinu V'Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach La'olam Vad. Yechi Adonenu Mareinu V'Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach La'olam Vad. Just thanking Rabbi Hoffinger in advance for really the absolutely fascinating insights of the past 3 weeks. Thank you, Rabbi Hoffinger.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Missed you all yesterday. Sorry that I wasn't able to make it. Mirz Hashem, tonight we'll have our final class. And Mirz Hashem, this will be the last class we have learning about the Beis Hamikdash. And the next interaction we have with the Beis Hamikdash will be by actually being in the Beis Hamikdash itself. So I think my screen should be shared at the moment. Hope it is. Give me just a moment to get it going again. Okay. So what we're going to do tonight in Mirz Hashem, just give me a moment. What we're going to do tonight is we will look at something that we didn't yet see from the Heichel, and we're going to learn about the Kalim and hopefully also bring in some sichas from the Rebbe. So if you remember seeing this is basically scale to size, a person 5 feet 10 inches tall standing in the doorway of the Heichel, which is the door of the Ulam. And once you enter into this doorway, let's see, you're in theory standing in the Ulam. The Ulam is basically a space of 11 amas wide. And if you remember, we learned that Ezra's Yisrael was 11 amas, the Ezra's Kainim was 11 amas, behind the Heichel was 11 amas, and the Ulam is 11 amas. I haven't seen any significance, but we do know that 11 represents higher than nature. Everything consists of 10, and 11 is higher than nature. I don't know if there's significance in that, but just something which I noticed. So now you're standing in the doorway to the Kodesh. This is a little bit of a smaller door. It's only 31.5 feet high, about a 3-story house. That's what you see in front of you. You see in front of you a 31.5 feet high door, 15.5 feet wide door, and then on the side, it doesn't tell us the size of these doors, but it says smaller doors. One to the right, which is the north, one to the left, which we said is the south. And if you remember, we mentioned the one on the left, the one to the south, was never used. It says, Lo nichnas adam la'elam l'sham. Nobody ever went in there. And I think it's mentioned that that's the door that Hashem exited the Beis Hamikdash from, so to speak, and accompanied the Yidden into Galus. The door that was used was to the right. Now, if you'd have X-ray vision and you'd look through the wall, this is what you would see. Because if you remember, we said there are these ta'im, these long hallways that go along the sides of the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, 5 on each side, and there's 3 stories of them. So you're talking about a hallway that, the first one right here, this one right here, And then you have over here. So this one over here is, it could be the measurements. Actually, I'm looking at it maybe a little off. I have to check again. But this one should be around 6 feet wide. This one's supposed to be bigger, so it could be supposed to be exchanged. I have to look into it. I think this one's supposed to be 6 feet wide. This one's supposed to be around 9 feet wide, and they're like, you're talking about 70, 80 feet long. And the rest of these three over here are each about 4.5 feet wide, long hallways. The first set, as you can see, is the same height as the door, so 31.5 feet high, and the other ones are half the size, 15 feet high, long hallways. And we spoke about these, so we're not going to get into it again. But the point is, you had one entrance. You could really get lost in this maze because between each set of hallways, there was one door. So if a person would go from one to the next and then go around the whole thing, you'd have to find your way back into this specific exit. Now, what we didn't learn about, we spoke about the Aron, but we did not learn about the various kalim in the Kodesh. And we have the menorah, which is over here. We have the shulchan, which is over here. And we have the Mizbeach Hazav, the Mizbeach Akteris, which is over here. And everything is scaled to size and proportional to the whole area. Now, let's start with the menorah. Now, the Rambam makes an interesting statement. He says all of the kalim in the Beis HaMikdash, their length, like over here, the shulchan, their length goes along the length of the Kodesh, except for the Aron. The Aron is the only one that its length, this way is longer, goes along the width. So this is the length, but this is the width. And then he says, and also the menorah is the same way. So it seems like he says all of the kalim, like the shulchan, the length goes along the length. And then he says, but the exception is the Aron as well as the menorah. So what's left? The only thing left is the Mizbeach Akteris, which is an exact square. So it's not length and width. So the only one left, it's only the shulchan, which is an interesting statement. I don't know what the explanation is, but possibly it's a certain message. Even if you have a certain rule, and it ends up that 9 out of 10 cases are an exception to the rule, you still have to know what's the rule. There's the rule and there's the exception. So even if the exception ends up happening over and over again, you still have to have the right hanachas. So sometimes we need to do things that are not according to the general rule. We don't have to then change our philosophy and opinion that this is what we identify with and this is what we connect to. We can still know what we're connected to and what's the truth. And temporarily, or for whatever it may be, for that individual person, they need to do things in a different way, and that's their way of serving Hashem. But it doesn't. I don't have to detract or minimize or take away from the rule in its pure and true form. We could always leave that as the rule, even if most of the cases are exceptions. So let's start with the menorah. So here we have a menorah, which is 3 amos high. It's about 4 feet and 9 inches high. And it's proportional to a person standing here, a Kohen Gadol, who is 5 feet 10 inches high. Now it's interesting. I actually prepared this specific class today because I completed everything that I had available. So if we look over here at the Kohen Gadol, if you look in the Mefarshim, they actually explain that the regular height of a person, this is a very interesting thing, is 3 amos, which is only 4 feet 9 inches, which is not what it seems to be the case in these days. The height of a person is more than that. So it could be the height of people changed over time, but the Mefarshim say that the height of a regular person, there's a discussion about it, is 3 amos. So why do we say, and there's a sikha from the Rebbe on this, why do we say that the space of a person on Shabbos and on other times is 4 amos? So the reason is because if you look, if a person is, imagine my top of my head is 3 amos, if I stretch out my arms, I have another amma, because the top of my head, I'm not sure how much of it you're able to see, basically hits the beginning of my arm here. So there's another amma. This is exactly an amma. So the size of a person includes when their hands are stretched out. And the Rebbe asks in a sikha, or explains in a sikha, why is it that we include the hands being stretched out? That's not the normal state of a person. So the Rebbe explains that the very being of a person is not just who they are on their own, but also how they reach out and upwards. That's not just extra credit or an additional thing. That's actually it's fundamental and built into the very basic fabric of who a person is. Reaching out, growing higher is not extra credit, so to speak, but it's basic to who we are, which is supposed to uplift us, to know that it's not shot that we are removed from our growth, but rather it is built into our very beings that we grow and that we rise higher and higher. So this is if the person would be the 3 amos. Now, the reason they have this discussion over here is because why do you need steps to lead up to the menorah? It says that there are 3 steps to go up to the menorah, because the word lahales or ba'aleischa is used 3 times, and therefore you need 3 steps. And the question they have is, why do you need 3 steps? It seems like the kohen should be tall enough. So one answer is because this is the height of a person. Others say that even if the person is this other height, this regular height that we're more used to, is a little taller, still you need the steps because it's very difficult to clean something out and even light it when it's equal height of the person's shoulders. You want to be a little bit on top of it, not very much higher than it, but somewhat above it is helpful for the person to be able to do the work comfortably instead of having their arm lifted up above their shoulder. So there was 3 steps over here. I didn't put it in because I was doing research, I have not found any discussion about the size of the steps. It could be when there's no discussion, it means that it's not really relevant. They would put whatever size they wanted to put. But there was 3 steps here as well. So let's go through the Menorah, and actually let's read it in the Rambam. So the Rambam states in Hilchos Beis Habchira Perek Gimel, he starts off teaching us about the Menorah. He says, "A Menorah, mufareshes tzurasa b'Torah." Its form, its shape is described to us in the Torah. V'arba gvim, there were 4 gvim, which we'll talk about what they are a little later. But basically, these cups that are sort of triangular. So there are 4 gvim, ushnei kafterim, which are these round circles that they're actually more like eggs, so more like an oval. Ushnei prachim, and 2 flowers. Again, we'll talk a little later exactly the shape of it, but it's basically like a bowl that the sides are bent outwards. He says like a lily flower. We'll see a little more about it later. So there were 4 gvim, 2 kafterim, and 2 brachim on hayu b'knei Menorah. So we have over here the kana with those items. Let's move along. The Rambam says, "V'oid perach shlishi." There was another 3rd flower. Where hayasamach leirecha, close to the base. So we have a base and a flower near it. Moving along, v'shalish reglayim hayala. This yarech had 3 legs. Then ushloisha kafteir macher. There were an additional 3 of the kafterim, of the round ones. From these 3, the 6 branches came out. 3 on each side. The Rambam continues, on each of these branches, there are 3 gvim, 3 of the upside down cups, or the cups, the kafter and a button, a kafter, the perach and a flower. And it concludes, which is basically a sort of, he says it's a technique that smiths do when they knock on the gold and the silver, and it creates a nice design shape that looks like an almond. So now, just to point out something that you can remember this, because it seems very difficult to remember all these numbers. I think in a way you can look at it in a quite simple way. Well, you need to remember there's some memory, but if you remember, I explained in a previous class that the best way to remember something is that you don't have to remember it, you know it. There's certain things you don't remember, you don't remember what's 6 plus 6. You know what's 6 plus 6. So the best way to remember something is that you know it, and therefore automatically remembering it is automatically that comes along with knowing it. So there is a little bit of memory, which is that each one has 3 cups, 1 button, and 1 flower. That's pretty straightforward. Now the middle one, it's even physically longer. It's also the center. It gets an additional 1 of each. So instead of having 3 cups like all the others, which it does also over here, it gets an additional cup. Instead of just having 1 button, like all of these here, which it has as well, it gets another one. And instead of just having 1 flower, like all of them, which it also has in the same place as well, it gets another flower. So basically it has 1 extra of each. That's one thing. Then in addition, next to the base, it gets another flower. The Rambam doesn't say the middle stick has 3 flowers. He says no. He says that it talks about the basic flower here and the basic one here. And then he says near the base, there's another flower. Like this flower, and even when it's measured, we're going to see later, the 3 tefachim on the bottom cover the legs, the base, and the flower. So it's, so to speak, separate, removed. And then in addition, the branches come out of a kafter. So therefore, there's another 3 kafter. And we'll see how he counts it. So let's move along. Nimtzu kolagvim shnayim ve'esrim. So it comes out that all of the cups are 22 because you have 3 on each. 3 times 7 is 21. Plus we said the middle one is an extra one. So it's 22. How many of the prachim are there? Prachim, sorry, 1 second. Here you see them highlighted. Prachim tisha. There are 9 prachim. Why? 1 on each is 7. Plus the middle one gets an extra one. So that's 8. And then the one near the base, that's 9. And then finally, Vakafterim achad aser, 11 buttons. How do you get 11? 1 on each is 7. Plus the middle one gets extra one, so that's 8. And an additional, the 3 from where the branches come out is 11. They all are ma'akiv the other, meaning if one is missing, it undermines the other ones. Even if one is missing from these 42 different designs, ma'akiv is kulan, it undermines all of them. They have to all be there. Then he goes on to describe them. Hagvim daimim lekaisis Alexandria shepiyim rachav v'shuleim kotzer. These gvim, these cups, are like Alexandrian cups that they are narrow they're wide on top and narrow on bottom. V'kafterim, how about the kafterim? These buttons, these round things, they're not really round. Kimin tapuchim krusim, they're these types of apples. Shenarukin mat, they're actually a little bit long. Kibates like an egg. Sheshnei rasha kadin, that the two ends of it are, they come in. Now it doesn't say where that was or if it was relevant. Was it the top part? Was it the side part? But they weren't exactly round. And then finally, v'aprachim, it's like a bowl and it's bent outwards. And elsewhere, the Rambam writes in Pirush HaMishnayos, it's like a perach shushan, which is a lily. So this is a picture of a gold lily. So that would be the shape of the prachim. Just want to mention again, if there are any questions, please feel comfortable to write it in the chat, and I will try to answer. Okay, let's move along a little more with the menorah, and then we'll move on to the other kelim. Now, before we actually go to the height, let's just share a sikha of the Rebbe. There is a sikha from the Rebbe, a very famous sikha of the Rebbe, in Chelik Chof Aleph Parshas Truma, where the Rebbe talks about a number of features of the menorah. Number one, the Rebbe talks over there about the very famous, like all the Bavitchers know, that the branches come out on a diagonal and they're not round. And the Rebbe speaks about this in a number of places. There's a very famous thing that the Rebbe talks about, how here you have it on Titus's arch, and they took from there that it's round, and you're literally going to learn from this person who came to crush the Yidden, and it was an enemy of the Yidden, and we're going to learn from him how the Beis HaMikdash was. There's actually I'm not sure where it is, if it's in a Gemara describing what the tzitz looked like, and then one of the Tanaim says that he was in Rome himself, and he saw the tzitz, and it was different. And nevertheless, writes the Meiri, we don't go by that. Whatever the explanation is, whether it's because they made another one, they made a fake one, it was one that was put aside because it wasn't done properly. The explanations are details. The main thing is to know, where do we get the truth from? So we know that the Rambam's picture is on a diagonal. Rashi says it's a diagonal. Those who say it's round, they say a significant reason, like round, like the heavens, to signify the different heavens. And even the one who writes that, one of these specific Mefarshim, he says, since the Rambam didn't tell us that they're diagonal, it means they're round. But the Rambam's son writes, if this person would have seen the picture that my father made, he wouldn't have said it. And so therefore, his opinion, he himself basically is telling you his opinion is not to be relied on, because he's saying it's based on the Rambam not stating anything. Meanwhile, we know that now we found the picture that the Rambam made where they're clearly on a diagonal. I think somewhere the Rebbe said the idea of making them round, maybe it was by the Luchas, or maybe also here, which klippa does it come from? We know that everything has a source in Ruchnius. It comes from a klippa of rounding things off. Not to keep things as they're supposed to have, but it's almost good. It's good enough, and not keeping firm, like in the way of we just had recently the parshas of mates and masay. They're having the firmness of a mata, to the determination and the commitment and dedication to do things in the proper way, and not rounding it off. Now, in that sikha, the Rebbe also talks about an interesting thing in the Rambam's picture, because even though we're not going to take the picture in every detail, because he wasn't doing it to let us know the relative size of each item and the exact shape. It was more to give you a general idea. But the Rambam makes the cups, like we have over here, upside down. And so the question is, why make them upside down? Okay, he made them an exact triangle. They're obviously not a triangle, because then they can't be put down on a table. But why make them upside down? And so the Rebbe explains over there that the whole idea of the menorah, as we know, is Eidus l'chol baya elam shashchina sheir b'Yisrael. It's a testimony to everybody that Hashem's with the Yidden, and that's why the miracle of Hanukkah didn't happen with a different part of the Beis HaMikdash. It happened specifically in the menorah, because the menorah is the idea that that Hashem is with the Yidden, and from the Beis HaMikdash, Misham Eira Yitzis L'chol Ha'olam. And so what's a cup for? I have a cup over here. So when it's sitting on the table, it's containing the liquid. And then when you turn it over, that's when it's not being makabel, it's not containing the liquid, it's giving the liquid. That's really its purpose. And so the cups being upside down is capturing this idea, that the idea of the menorah, the inyan of the menorah, is to pour and give light to the whole world. And that's also why we find that the windows in the Beis HaMikdash were pointed outwards. In the olden days, they wouldn't have all the electricity. So what they would do is they would have the sun come into the room. They'd have it in an angle. So this way it brightens up more of the room. In the Beis HaMikdash, it says it was opposite. The inside was narrow and the outside widened. And that what basically represented that it's not that the Beis HaMikdash needs the light of the world, but to the contrary, the light of the Beis HaMikdash goes to the entire world. So that's something which the menorah represents. That's why what we use is fire. Fire is the most ruchnius of all physical things that we have. It's always looking to go upwards. It produces light. It produces heat. And so that's why the menorah has this idea in it. Now, regarding the height of the menorah, the Rambam continues, and he describes the breakdown of the different parts. He says, Goiva Menorah hayashmoina aser tefach was 18 tefachim. Each tefach is about 3 inches. Saraglayim va'perach shloisha tefachim. The legs, he doesn't mention over here clearly. It's interesting. He doesn't mention the yarich, the base, and the flower are 3 tefachim. Afterwards, tefachayim cholok, the 2 empty tefachim. Then we have a tefach with a gavia, a kafter, and perach. Now here there's a discussion. We're going to see later that each one of the kafterim here are full tefach. How could you have all 3 here? So some Mefarshim say they were all the same size. Those kafterim were bigger, these were smaller. Others say that no, they were all the same size, and it seems this is the Rambam's opinion. But a kafter came out over here, a perach over here, and a gavia over here. So they were all in the same place, and they took up a full tefach, but one next to the other instead of making them smaller. And then you have another 2 empty tefachim. Then you have a tefach with a kafter. It says tefach kafter, and the 2 kanim come out of it. Then another tefach which is chalak, without anything on it. Then another tefach with a kafter, and the 2 kanim are coming out of it. Then again another empty tefach. Then again a tefach with a kafter and the branches coming out of it. And then finally 2 empty tefachim and the final 3 tefachim that have in them. Let's just see nishtayu shloisha tefachim shebehen shloisha gvim kafter beperach. So that's the breakdown. If you do the math, we have 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 15, 18. Now, I just want to point out that everything over here is scaled to size, all based on the Rambam, but there are a few things that the Rambam doesn't describe to us in detail. So, for example, what was the height of the legs? It doesn't tell us. It just says these bottom 3 items took up 3 tefachim, but what is the division of these 3 tefachim? Also, how big is the base? And then the flowers. This flower here is made. You can see it's very obvious. It's half the size of this kafter. It's certainly not the size of the kafter. It would seem that the perach should be a full tefach. It's not clear. And then also on the top 3 tefachim, you're having over here a gavia, which should be 1 tefach, but you have 1 gavia, 2 gaviyim, 3, a kafter and a perach, all in 3 tefachim. How exactly was it arranged? So when it comes to these things, one possible answer is that that's left to the people making it. That's not one of the requirements. They have to figure out how to do it. However they do it is fine. Of course, everything's Hashgacha Pratis, even when a leaf turns over as Hashgacha Pratis. But we don't turn over a leaf and say it's Hashgacha Pratis. If it turns over, we know. So there's certain things that we're instructed to do, and it's very clear that that's what Hashem wants. And other things are left, even if there will afterwards be Hashgacha Pratis. So for example, the Rambam writes that all these requirements are only true, or many of them, if the menorah is made out of gold. But if it was made out of other metals, you don't need all of these. For example, the gviyim, kafterim, and prachim, you don't need them. So what do? How would they do it? You don't need it, but you could put it. You don't put it, it's left. In other words, it's not necessary. What they do is basically not important when it comes to that. And they could do it anyway. So that's basically about the menorah. Then we'll move on to the shulchan. Let me just see the timing here. So let me share a sikha before we go on to the shulchan. So if you remember, we have over here the Ezras Nashim. We don't see it here in the picture. To get into the Ezras Nashim, there are 12 steps. To go into the Ezras Yisrael, there are 15 steps. To go into the Ezras Kainim, there's one big step, much bigger than the others. It's double the size of all other steps. Then there's another duchen of 3 steps. Then over here, to get into the Heichel, there are 12 steps. And the Rebbe explains in a sikha, I'm not sure if I shared some of this a little already. The Rebbe explains in the sikha that the number of steps and the being of steps is obviously significant, and what it basically signifies is that the kedusha is going higher and higher. And actually, in the words of the Rambam, it doesn't even say that the area goes higher. It says the person goes and goes higher. The person goes and goes higher. He refers to the person, indicating that a person has to grow and go higher in order to get to another level of kedusha. And so the Rebbe says the size of the steps, the number of steps, obviously all embodies the significance and the extent of the aliyah and kedusha of each place over the previous place. The Rebbe says that according to that, there's a difficulty. Why are there no steps between the Kodesh and the very holiest of all places, which is the Kodesh HaKadoshim? And in short, what the Rebbe says is more of an arichas there, but in very short, what the Rebbe says is the idea that a person grows and puts in work and effort and energy to come closer to Hashem exists in all of the high levels. When it comes to connecting to the very essence of Hashem, that happens through complete and total bittul. It doesn't come about through the person growing. It comes about through the person allowing for Hashem to be revealed. And for Hashem to be revealed, then all the different elements of self have to go away. Then the essence of a yid is revealed, which is one with the essence of Hashem. And that's why when it comes to going from the Kodesh to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, when it comes to going from all the different levels of revelations that exist, do you want to get to Atzmus Hussein Seif Baruch Hu, so to speak, you want to go to Bias Mashiach, not just a high level of revelation that there wasn't the Beis Hamikdash, but that actual coming of Mashiach, that comes about through the approach of Bittul and Kabbalah's El, which allows for the very essence of Hashem to be revealed. And that's why it says that the greatness of the final generation before Mashiach coming is in Bittul and Kabbalah's El. It's not like some people think that they did everything before us. They were much greater, Tanaim, Amoraim, Rishenim, which they obviously were, and Shoftim and Nevi'im, and all these great and awesome levels of people. And we are the final part, but rather there's a certain quality that we have that was lacking, and that's why Mashiach wasn't able to come. And what is that quality? The Bittul and Kabbalah Soul that's specifically found in our generation. So that's there's a sikha from the Rebbe on that. Let's look a little bit at the Shulchan. Actually, no, let's do first the Mizbeach HaKteris. So let's click on the Mizbeach HaKteris. So it says regarding the Mizbeach HaKteris, again, this is just if you're talking about a person who's 5 feet 10 inches tall. This will be versus a person that's 4 feet 9 inches tall, like we said, the height, average height that is brought in some places of a person. Someone's asking over here if there's a recording of this. There is. Somebody shared with me one of the recordings, and that way I got to where all of them were found. I don't have the link, but I see somebody just posted it. And regarding the sources, yes, you could get in touch with Gemara Academy. You could email me at chananya@gemaraacademy.com. I could put it here if you have any question about any of the specific sources. But much of this is taken. Most of it is based, I mentioned in the first class, I forgot to mention it again. Most of it is based on the Rambam. And if you want to learn the Rambam, Hilchos Beis Habchira, one of the best resources out there is the Rambam Mavur, which I have over here. They put out a booklet just for learning during the 3 weeks, but they also have an entire sefer of the whole. This is all of the Beis Hamikdash, but they have the full form of the Rambam. And in the notes, it's very extensive notes with many sources, with many opinions about certain things as well. And you can really find a large amount of the content over there. Interesting question. Someone's asking over here if people made the menorah out of, for example, silver, did it still have to be straight? You have to look at the exact wording of the Rambam. If I'm not mistaken, the Rambam specifies which things are not going to be relevant. He doesn't say anything about straight versus round at all, because he doesn't even mention it. It's just in his picture, so he certainly wouldn't be referring to that. But I'm pretty sure he says it specifically about the various designs and about it being hollow and about the weight. Now, I'm not sure if he mentions any of the other features, but he certainly wouldn't have said it about, it's a good question, interesting question. He certainly wouldn't have said it about the shape because he doesn't even mention the shape. We just have his picture of it. Now, the Mizbeach HaKteris was 1 amma, 1.5 feet, by 1 amma, 1.5 feet squared, and the height was 2 ammas, which is around 3 feet. So that would be the height of the Mizbeach HaKteris. And there's a sikha from the Rebbe, I think it's in Chelik Yud Aleph, where the Rebbe talks about the significance of the Kteris, that the Kteris represents complete unity and oneness with Hashem, as opposed to the Karbanis, which is the idea of Kiruv, that you're coming close, that no matter how close you become, even if you became so close that you're one, it's still, the language that's being used is that it's 2 separate entities that are coming close. The Kteris represents absolute and complete unity with Hashem, and that's why we find this idea is expressed in the fact that if you open up the Chumash to learn about the various Kalim, so if you want to find the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash, you're going to go to Parshas Truma. If you want to find the Big Day Kunei, you're going to go to Parshas Tetzaveh. But the Mizbeach Hazav, this inner Mizbeach, the Mizbeach HaKteris, is not taught in Parshas Truma. It's taught at the very end of Parshas Tetzaveh, because that really represents the goal of everything in the Beis Hamikdash, is that absolute complete oneness, the idea of Yisrael u'malka b'chudai, that Yidden and Hashem are completely and entirely one, which is, it's connected also now to this time that Tziyim b'mishpati pada v'shaveh b'tztakav, that there's different ways that a Yid come close to Hashem. There's a way that a Yid come close to Hashem that even in the B'chol Tzar Asim Leitzar, the difficulties and hardships of a Yid are literally the center, so to speak, of what matters to Hashem. Like we saw in the idea of the kir, that the kir represents removing the negative, and a person feels like that's just a preparation, but it's not true. It's in that place that literally the essence of Hashem is found. On the other end, like everything, there's always, right, sometimes Torah is higher, sometimes mitzvahs are higher. There's also the idea of seeing b'mishpat tipada, the idea of Torah, which Torah basically represents that a Yid is higher than everything. That's the real essence and the real existence of a Yid. Like we say that a Yid and the Neshama is a chelik l'kal mimal mamish. What does it mean, mamish? That even in the place of mamish, where you're grounded, you're down to earth, you're physical, over there it's a chelik l'kal mimal. I heard actually an interesting vert, maybe somewhat related, that when do we start saying Tachnun after a whole month of Nisan not saying Tachnun? Beis Iyar. The whole Nisan we didn't say Tachanun. Rosh Chodesh year we don't say Tachanun. We start on Beis year, which is L'Chatchila River. So the Rebbe explained once that the idea of the L'Chatchila River doesn't mean that a Yid is above the Gullus. Of course, the Yid is above the Gullus. The idea of the L'Chatchila River is that when a Yid is engaged and involved in the Gullus, and that's what the Torah acknowledges that place of Yid. Over there, a Yid is higher than the Gullus. It's not that a person has to, so to speak, activate a deeper part of themselves that transcends the Gullus. It's the recognition that even the aspect of our identity, so to speak, the mamale, the keiches pnimim that are involved with the world, alpitera, and the world, so to speak, is a reality. Over there, a Yid is higher than the world. Within that state of mind of being involved with the world and so to speak, relating to the world, and that's a reality. We don't transcend that. Over there, the essence of the Yid transcends the world. Let me just see. There's a couple of things here. Yes, the Rambam writes. Oh, someone said I sent something where they can message just to them instead of everyone. Let me see how I could. I'll put the email if somebody had any questions. The Rambam writes clearly that the 42 I think we saw the text earlier. The 42 items are ma'akiv one another when it's made out of gold. Now for the let me see where's the shulchan. Okay, here we go. Now just for the final part for the shulchan. So I was still in the middle of working on the shulchan. So the shulchan was 9 tefachim high, which is it's 1.5 amos. So it's about 2.25 feet, 2.25 feet high. It was 12 tefachim long, which is around 3 feet long, and 6 tefachim wide, which is about 1.5 feet. Now, this is one of the things that there's often, I think, a misconception. When you tell somebody to imagine the shulchan, could be I mentioned this in a previous class, they imagine a whole elaborate structure with the lechem aponim on it and the separations of the hollows, the half circled hollows, and the two. Okay, it seems like the video went off. I'm sorry. I saw the host just asked to turn it on. You have the hollows, and then you have the sticks on the side, but that's not really what the shulchan is. The shulchan is, like the word in Hebrew, is a table. That's all it is. It's a gold table, about 2.25 feet high, 3 feet long, and 1.5 feet wide. That's what it is. There's also a zer zahav. There's like a gold trim, either on bottom or above it. That's the shulchan. The rest of the items are not the shulchan. It's the lechem aponim. It's the kalim of the shulchan. It's interesting because if you tell somebody to imagine the mizbeach, whichever mizbeach, or the menorah, most people don't even know what the kalim are. That what exactly under this? I know there's kalim. Maybe there's a tongs for the menorah, and there is a sort of shovel. We're not even familiar necessarily with the kalim, let alone that we don't picture them. But when it comes to the shulchan, we imagine it with the kalim, which that's what they're called. They're called the kalim of the shulchan. The reason we do that is because it's lechem. The lechem panim have to be their tamid always. So, for example, I don't know if we mentioned this in one of the previous classes, that when you came into the ulam, there were 2 tables. There was a marble table and a gold table. What were those tables used for? So basically, they prepared the lechem panim. You can't lechem aponim. You're not allowed to bake them on Shabbos. It's not doiches Shabbos, the baking of them, but they have to replace them on Shabbos. So they bake them erev Shabbos. Then what do? They take the lechem upon them and they put it on the marble table. Why the marble table? It says that the metal may cause it to spoil because the heat basically gets heated up as opposed to the marble that'll cool it off. So they put it on the marble table. Then it came time on Shabbos to replace it. They would literally be taking off the lechem upon them on one side, which is basically they would stand. If you're imagining here, if here's the entrance, and here's the wall behind it. Here is the space between the shulchan and the menorah. So these people over here would be taking it off, and they'd be putting it on. There was never a moment that it wasn't covered with the lechem upon him. Literally, they were pulling it off and putting it on the same place. They wouldn't push it, but they would be pulling it and push and putting. And then they would take those off, and they can't yet eat them. First, you have to take the 2 spoons of the levina and burn them. So they would take them, they put them on the gold table. Then they would burn the levina, and then they would distribute. They would divide. There's the whole system of how they divided it. They would divide the lechem aponim between the 2 groups of kahanim, because every week the groups of kahanim switched, and they switched on Shabbos. So one group would get 7 of the lechem aponim, one would get 5. So it says that they had a marble table and then a gold table. Why was it like this? Because Mailan B'Kodesh, so they would be Maila from the marble to this gold one. Ve'ein Meridin, you can't go down from gold, so they put it back onto a gold table afterwards. So because it was always being used and covered with the kalim, so that's how we imagine it. But that's not what a shulchan is. The shulchan is literally, it's in a way the simplest of all kalim, but as is very common, we complicate the simple things. But it's the simplest of all kalim. It was just a table. Now, one thing I want to mention, I don't think we mentioned it before, is that we know that the shulchan, as well as the mizbeach, keteiros, they had these rings and poles to carry them. Now, there are some Mefarshim that say, the Rambam now doesn't mention it, but the Rambam doesn't mention many things. He doesn't even tell us the height. He doesn't tell us about the design around it, the zer. Some Mefarshim say that's not the Rambam's job over here. Those things are already written clearly in the Chumash. He doesn't have to get into that. So some say that there was also the rings and the poles. The Rambam just doesn't mention it. But others say, no, that was only in the Mishkan where they were traveling, so they have to carry it. But when it came to the Shulchan and the Mizbeach HaKteris and the Beis HaMikdash, over there was no rings or poles. Now, obviously, by the Aron, there was always rings and poles. And it's interesting, the Rebbe also says this in a Sikha, maybe similar to the idea of the outstretched hands. It's a Sikha, I think, in Chelik Yud Aleph, that the natural state of the holiest thing in the Beis HaMikdash, the Aron, is it has to be ready to go out. You could be the holiest person, the greatest person, but what's constantly there by a Yid? To go out and help another Yid. To take the Aron, it has to have the rings there, and it has to always be there. It can never be removed. Not only is it there, it can never be removed. That is never a separate part of a person. It's not a separate part of a Yid that he goes out to help another Yid. It's not that the Yid is connected fully with Hashem, and this is something they also do. But that's all part of the identity of a Yid and the very core of a Yid, to go out and help another Yid. So for the Shulchan, you basically have this table. I'm still in the middle of actually forming it and figuring out how to I know the length is accurate and the height is accurate, trying to figure out how to figure out a 3D, that this should be the equivalent of 1.5 feet. Now, on top of it, they placed the lechem upon him. So this is not yet complete, but just one thing you could see is it says that each of the breads was 10 tfachim. So this table here is 12 tfachim this way. This way, it's 6 tfachim. So they actually put the length of the bread to the width of the table. So it basically covered here. But now we said it's 10 tfachim. So what they did is they basically had 6 tfachim this way, and then they bent it in. They bent the sides inwards. That's why you see in the picture. Sometimes they show them all the way in. The Rambam, it doesn't seem like they're all the way in. According to the Rambam, it seems that some opinions say like this, but the Rambam's opinion seems like it was basically like that, like a trapezoid. It went inwards, but it didn't go over the top. So just like a sort of like a tent shape, but they didn't meet on top fully in that direction, and then over here. So you basically had 6 tfachim and then 4 extra on each side. 10 tfachim is about 1.5 feet, a little less maybe. Each tefach is a little more than 3 inches. So you're talking about 30 inch. But each one is also, it's more. It's close to 3 feet. So you had one like that, and then the width is 5 tfachim. We said the table is 12. So in the middle here, they had the 2 spoons of the levina. And then they basically had them piled up one on the other. So Mirza Hashem will finish this at some point, and you'll see how the height altogether ends up being, I think it says, an additional 21 tfachim. When you do the math of each of the breads, one on top of the other, as well as the space in between them, it'll end up being an additional 21 tfachim. I'll have to put together a visual on that. Mirza Hashem, where are we holding in time? Okay, I think we'll end with that. And the ikar is we should talk about zeicha to the coming of Mashiach and to being with the Beis HaMikdash. I see somebody shared, okay, Baruch Hashem, all of the recordings. We should be zeicha to the building of the Beis HaMikdash, the coming of Mashiach, and we'll be able to say, they say when Mashiach comes and say, we'll be able to say that we're familiar with the Beis HaMikdash. We know where in the Har Beis we entered, where is the Ezras Nashim, where are each of the Lashachis. If you have to meet somebody, you'll meet them by the Lishkas Nazirim, wherever it may be. You'll know the Ezras Yisrael, the Ezras Kain, and the Mizbeach. And like the Rebbe mentions, the Baal HaTurim writes that it says V'atam Tiyu Mamlechas Kayanim Kahanim G'deilim, that every Yid is a Kain Gadol. And really every morning when we wash our hands, it says that it's the idea of the Kain, and really a Kain Gadol, that every single day a Yid is literally working in the Eibishter's world, which that's what the Beis HaMikdash is. It's the Eibishter's house. This is the Eibishter's house. And we start off the day, we wash our hands and feet to be Mekadosh ourselves for that work. And when Mashiach comes, this idea of Kayanim G'deilim, the Rebbe says, will come out in that every Yid will enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So we should be zeicha to the coming of Mashiach and to the building of the Beis HaMikdash physically, and to all being together in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, take it from Yad Mamish, and Yehapcha Yamim Elu L'Sasan L'Simcha, We shouldn't have to. But it not only won't it be a chas shalom a negative day, that we know that the depth of the day is really the infinite love of Hashem to a yid, the idea of Yisrael umalka b'chodai, and that's why when Mashiach comes, it'll be a yom tov. All of the yom tovim, it says, are going to lose their greatness because of how great Mashiach is. It'll be like nisbatel. But even in that time, when the other yom tovim will be, so to speak, nisbatel, these will be days of yom tovim. So we should take it from Yad Mamish, and to meet together in the Kodesh HaKadoshim with the coming of Mashiach. Wishing everybody a wonderful rest of your evening, and we shouldn't have to fast, but still wishing everyone an easy fast.